Ren and Stimpy in Lunchroom Manners. So they brought in a gym teacher to talk about lunchroom manners. Okay.
Hi, I'm Mr. Punch.
Just
I'll
before
be your
lunch
substitute
one day,
today.
a puppet show was put on at school.
It was
It was
filthy.
called Mr. Bungle Goes to Lunch. It was fun to
Fake!
watch.
Fake!
Read
In the
between the
puppet show,
lines, kids.
Mr. Bungle came to the boys' room on his way to lunch. He looked at his hands.
Ah, no!
His hands were dirty,
The less said about
his
that,
hair was
the
messy.
better.
but Mr. Bungle didn't stop to wash his hands or comb his hair. He went right to lunch.
Fecal matter is fun!
Then, instead of getting into line at the lunchroom, Mr. Bungle pushed everyone aside and went right to the front.
Prompting Tommy to pull out his
Even
revolver.
though this made the children laugh, no one thought that was a fair thing to do.
Except for little Charles Darwin.
Then, in the lunchroom, Mr. Bungle was so
Oh,
clumsy
sorry.
and impolite
Could you get
he
that?
knocked over
Thanks.
everything, and no one wanted to sit next to him. And when he finally
I
knocked
swear,
his own
man,
tray
I'm not
off
drunk.
the table, that was the end of the puppet show.
Heart attack.
The children knew that even though Mr. Bungle was funny to watch, he wouldn't be much fun to eat with. Phil knew that a Mr. Bungle wouldn't have many friends. He wouldn't want to be like Mr. Bungle.
He wanted to be a Mrs. Bungle.
Later, Miss Brown said it was time for the children who ate in the cafeteria to go to lunch.
Or hell.
She hoped there
their
weren't any
choice.
Mr. Bungles in this room.
Hey, that kid's a communist.
Phil stopped to return a book to Miss Brown while his friends went on to the lunchroom.
How did you like
He
Ghetto
would have to
Freaks,
catch up
Phil?
with them later.
Oh, good.
On his way to catch
Even
up
the
with his
halls are
friends,
hardcore
Phil
white.
almost walked past the boys' room, but he stopped and thought. Were his hands clean?
Was his soul
No,
clean?
they were a little dirty. Phil remembered that Mr. Bungle didn't wash his hands.
Mr. Bungle bathed
Mr.
in
Bungle's
sin.
hair was messy, too. Phil didn't want to be like
Bah.
Mr. Bungle. Inside the boys' room, Phil was surprised to see some of his friends washing their
Oh my
hands,
God,
too.
Tommy, what are you doing?
Phil washed his hands well, with lots of soap.
In fact, he emptied the whole dispenser.
Then he rinsed the soap off.
Then he removed his disciples' sandals and washed their feet.
Phil dried his hands well, too. When he was finished, he threw the paper towel in the basket where it belonged. And
What
then
is
he made
this,
sure
St.
that his
Mary's
hair
School
looked
for
neat.
Forrest Gumps? Hey.
Now, Phil and his friends were ready for lunch.
Ladies first.
There was a line of children waiting to get into the lunchroom
Hello,
when Phil got
girls.
there. He saw some boys he knew at
Salute.
the front of the line. They waved for him to go up to the front with them. But Phil didn't want to break
No
into
way,
line
man.
as Mr.
I'll
Bungle
cut
did.
you.
So Phil went to the end. That was the fair thing to do. He would see his other friends inside the lunchroom.
Or he would see them dead.
The line moved very fast, and soon Phil was inside. First he picked up his tray.
Wait, we're not done? Oh, I'm supposed to keep narrating? What?
Then he got his silverware.
Sorry, thought we were done.
He put his knife, fork, and spoon neatly on the tray,
And adjusted them for 15 minutes.
and then he slid his tray along. He always enjoyed looking at the good food in the cafeteria. It tasted good, and was good for him, too.
I love
Instead
you,
of having a
meatloaf.
sandwich today, Phil decided to take the hot lunch.
Oh, yeah.
Phil took some bread and butter, too. And he knew what else he wanted, milk. But Alice took the last carton on the tray.
Tough crap.
Maybe there was more milk. So he said, "May I please have some milk?"
Not going to
Phil
happen.
remembered to say, "May I?" and "please." That was very polite. Yes, there was more milk.
Take it now.
Phil
Take it.
remembered to say, "Thank you," when he took the carton of milk. Phil had good manners. He didn't want to be like Mr. Bungle in the lunchroom.
No, we're all out.
Phil didn't want to forget his dessert. The cake looked
Oh.
delicious.
It was the size of Phil's head.
At the end of the line, the lunchroom supervisor said she had noticed how polite Phil was, and she smiled at him. She wouldn't smile at a Mr. Bungle.
She'd flip him right off.
Phil went to the table where his friends were.
All the white
He
children.
put his tray down carefully, pulled out his chair quietly, and sat down.
And pulled
He knew
out his
friend
gun,
wouldn't like a
reenacting the
noisy Mr.
cantina
Bungle at
scene
their
from
table.
Star Wars.
There was someone Phil liked, Freddie. He always brought his lunch from home. It looked good.
But it's really not.
Freddie had a sandwich, an apple, a cookie, and milk.
You got that? Okay.
Before Phil began to eat, he always put a napkin on his lap.
He also
did
took
Freddie.
off his shoes and unbuttoned his shirt.
Everyone liked
It
Freddie.
made the other children
He was
very
very
uncomfortable.
polite. For example, if he had food in his mouth when someone talked to him, he always took time to chew the food with his
What
mouth
the
closed and
hell is
swallow
this?
before he answered. Phil noticed how straight and tall Freddie usually sat.
Then Phil began
Freddie
to
kept his feet
question
on
just
the
how
floor,
straight
too.
he really was.
Phil would rather be like Freddie than like Mr. Bungle.
And he'd rather be more like
Another
Barbara
polite
Feldon
person
than
everyone
Pam
liked
Dauber.
was Alice. For example, when Alice sneezed, she covered her
Butterflies
mouth
came
with
out.
clothes. This protected her friends at the table from any germs. While Phil and his friends ate, a boy ran past their table.
Shots
You
rang
shouldn't
out.
run in the lunchroom. Only Mr. Bungle would do that.
Remember to conform, dear.
Phil and his friends wouldn't like to have a Mr. Bungle at their table. Then lunchtime wouldn't be as much fun as it is.
And boy, is it
Phil
fun.
ate slowly and enjoyed his lunch. Finally, he had eaten everything except his dessert.
Mescal and Jello.
He saved his cake for last. Only a Mr. Bungle would eat his dessert before he'd finished the rest of his lunch. And Phil wasn't a Mr. Bungle. The cake was good.
Said the Lord God.
Phil drank his milk carefully.
It was
Some
laced with
children are messy when they
nitroglycerin.
drink milk, but not Phil. As each of Phil's friends finished, they didn't leave the table, but waited for all the others to finish eating too.
It was time for Phil's
Phil was the
intervention.
last one done. He wiped his mouth and hands carefully with his napkin.
Carefully mopping the
Then he
butt
cleaned
sweat
the table
off of the
where he
seat.
sat. He didn't want to leave his place at the table dirty.
Filthy, nasty.
Everyone at the table cleaned his own place well. But look at that table.
It was hot.
It was left very messy. Phil thought a Mr. Bungle must have sat there. But Phil didn't want to be like Mr. Bungle.
My life is a
So he put
lie.
his chair
I am
neatly
Mr.
in place.
Bungle.
And his table looked fine.
And salty.
Not a piece of paper or scrap of food was left on it.
The mice would not eat tonight.
No Mr. Bungle sat here.
And action.
Phil's friends were careful to put their waste papers and empty milk cartons where they belonged. In this way, they helped keep the lunchroom clean. Phil was certain that Mr. Bungle wouldn't put his paper in the waste basket and his
Phil's
empty
a
carton
certified
on the milk tray.
bungleologist.
Mr. Bungle probably wouldn't bother to put his lunch tray in the right place either, but Phil and his friends did.
They are the superior race.
Lunch was good today. And then Miss Brown told
Are you
Phil and
now,
his
or have you
friends
ever
how proud
been a
she was
Mr.
of them.
Bungle?
They had left their table the neatest in the lunchroom. No one here was a Mr.
Don't look at my
Bungle,
butt.
and no
You were
one
looking at my
wanted
butt.
to
I know
be.
you were.
Are you like Mr. Bungle?
Oh, dude,
Mr.
how
Bungle
long was
is
I out,
ashamed
man?
Because he spoils lunchtime. Don't be like Mr. Bungle. Have good lunchtime manners, and lunch will be more fun for everyone.
The red curtain.
Are you like Mr. Bungle?